Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On Saturday, October 7th, the world was stunned by a well-coordinated and brutal attack on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas. At least 1,400 Israelis were confirmed killed in the assault, including 289 soldiers. In Gaza, officials say the death toll now stands around 3,000. Following the attack, Israel declared war on the militant Islamist group. In a region prone to swift destabilization, all eyes are focused on Israel and Gaza. Dave, there seemed to be a massive intelligence failure, unless I got this really wrong. Any idea what happened with the Mossad and the CIA?
I think that Mossad and the CIA did get caught flat-footed a little bit, obviously. But I think that you have to give credit where credit is due. Hamas operation was carefully planned and executed. And apparently only a very few in Gaza among Hamas foot soldier terrorists, even knew what was going to happen as they were doing it. They had excellent operations security. They struck quickly, taking out video surveillance with snipers and microwave towers with drones. So they eliminated eyes and ears almost immediately, as well as communications. And with the microwave towers gone and taken down, all of the ground sensors were offline. So they couldn't hear what was going on, and they depended on that. They struck on a holiday, when the Sabbath was ongoing and security and IDF forces were reduced. And so they really had this well planned out. They had detailed maps and diagrams of the buildings and a good understanding of which buildings they were going to target. They built up this rocket inventory, evidently over a long number of months. They had bulldozers breaking down the concrete wall once the surveillance, the cameras, and this listening equipment was disabled. And with that initial barrage of rockets, the Israel Defense Forces' attention was diverted. The bottom line here is, when you think about it, Hamas has demonstrated that it's really not capable of such intricate planning. And so, in my view, Iran and Russia are the prime suspects.
Graham, you've been on the ground for conflicts. What goes through the minds of the Israeli Defense Force? That's when we say IDF, just FYI. What do you have to tell yourself before you enter into a place like the Gaza Strip?
Well, this urban warfare, as what we used to describe as FIBUA, fighting in a built-up area, is the most dangerous form of warfare for any soldier, particularly when you're assaulting rather than defending. Because if you're defending an urban environment, you're defending, buildings and other structures. If Hamas knows what they are doing, then they can harden those buildings, or some of them at least, to make them incredibly time-consuming and incredibly costly in terms of lives, just to take one building. So when the IDF ground forces do move into Gaza, which at some point they're going to, right now they're softening it up with aerial bombardments, or artillery bombardments and whatever. But when they do go in, it's going to be incredibly dangerous because, first of all, you've got IEDs, improvised explosive devices, which could be pretty much anywhere, and especially, obviously, in the inside of certain buildings that Hamas would know that the IDF want to capture. Those structures could be made into death traps. And then, of course, with these people, we're talking about zealots, we're talking about fanatics who are willing to give up their lives. So then you've got the possibility of suicide bombers. Obviously, you've got the issue of snipers. So this is going to be an incredibly dangerous operation. And then, of course, if you're taking, say, sniper fire from a building, well, what do? Do you put a rocket-propelled grenade into that building and just destroy it? Well, Hamas are going to be using human shields probably. So then you've got the tragic collateral damage of killing possibly hostages or just kind of civilians. So Yeah, the whole thing is actually pretty much a nightmare scenario to launch a ground invasion of Gaza, but I think it's inevitable that they will do.
So right now, you think they're going to stick in, just bombs from the air, assault from the air?
I personally think they can't afford to just do that because they need to. They've kind of vowed. Unfortunately, Netanyahu, for better or worse, has vowed to eliminate Hamas, and they cannot do that just from aerial bombardment. They've actually got to send in ground troops. Obviously they'll be sending in tanks and everything if they if they were the only real way to do this without massive loss of life on the Israeli side would have been to basically, tell the Palestinians to evacuate Gaza within a certain amount of time and then just level the whole place, quite frankly, turn it into a parking lot.
I think everybody on this panel, except for Andrew, has watched all of this go on for years, decades and decades. And Tim, that's where I want to bring you in. The Jewish state has always had a tenuous situation. I mean, they're surrounded by Arab states that just want to get rid of them completely altogether, gone. Historically speaking, is this the worst it's ever been?
Well, I think Americans cannot understand what it's really like to live on essentially a postage stamp sized country surrounded by enemies. So imagine, and we're talking about more than 20 countries historically committed to the destruction of Israel. Imagine if we were surrounded by Mexico and Canada, who were committed to destroying the United States. And this is even worse because of the closer proximity of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and hostile Muslim and Arab actors that surround Israel. I mean, I think it's stunning. You would have thought 50 years to the day after the Yom Kippur War of 1973, that Israel would have been on a state of high alert simply because of it being an important anniversary.
Yeah.
And they weren't. It was the 50th anniversary. And of course, originally we had the 6-day war back in 1967. And that is where Israel captured territories that became disputed, became basically the basis for all the hostilities that have followed. But I think most of us can see that when you displace a people and replace them with somebody else, this kind of conflict is inevitable, and it's been going on now for 75 years, since 1948. And the irony is that the United Nations was the one that created Israel, and yet it is the UN that really threatens Israel more than anything else, with anti-Israeli states ganging up on Israel. They're in a very tenuous situation. And it seems to me militarily that when all bets are off is when Hezbollah gets involved, because they have a much greater level of military sophistication and are funded by Iran. And when Hezbollah starts getting heavily involved in this conflict, which I think they will, that's when it's going to take it to even another level.
Are you predicting? I mean, I know it's a dicey situation, but are you predicting that this is a possible World War III entrance just from the Middle East?
I think we'd be having our heads in the sand to say that it couldn't be. In other words, yes, it definitely could be, because you're going to get involved all the big geopolitical forces in the world, the United States, the Russians, the Chinese. And look at the hostile reaction around the world, the shameful pro-Hamas protests. As I said, the only good thing about this conflict is that the people that would stand up there in the United States and around the world and support Hamas, we need to make a list, because these people are subhuman to support the slaughter of innocents, which is what Hamas did. And yet, that's what millions of people around the world are doing. It's shameful, and yet unsurprising, isn't it?
I'd like to pick up on that point, elaborate a little bit slightly on what Tim just said there, because here's the way you look at it. This is the kind of left-wing, progressive, pro-Palestinian view of what has happened here. You know, the Palestinians, they're poor, they're downtrodden, they're oppressed. You know, they're virtually living in a big prison that the Israelis essentially created. Again, this is not my opinion. This is what, you know, left wingers would say. This is what pro-Palestinian supporters would say. You know, so they're so downtrodden, they're so deprived, they're living in such misery that you know, who can blame them for harboring this rage against Israel? And so for that reason, you know, you can't really condemn what Hamas did. Now, here's the problem. You think about that and you're saying, okay, so essentially you're saying that the ends always justify the means, even when the ends are, you know, raping and torturing and slaughtering innocent people. You've got to think people who have that mindset, they are capable of anything at all. And so, yes, I agree totally with you, Tim, is that, you know, we need to be making notes about who these people are, because they are basically saying that they are willing to condone political violence on a horrendous scale because it's justified because, oh, you know, we're poor and downtrodden and we deserve better.
And the thing is, a slaughter is all about slaughter. It's not about achieving a greater objective. The objective itself is to murder as many Jews as possible. It's not like they're doing it to grab territory. Yes, of course, they do want to restore Israel to Palestine, but they don't care about their people. If Hamas cared about their people, about the ordinary Palestinians, the innocent Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, they would not have unleashed this provocative attack, which is certain to result in the deaths of thousands of their own people. Mm-hmm. They don't care about their people.
I'm going to pivot a bit here on this. I don't think anybody's going to disagree that the Palestinian citizens aren't the problem. It's the terrorist organization that is the problem, and they're just in the way. But you know, I want to pivot over to Andrew. It's callous and maybe too early to tell, but aren't wars good for the economy in general, Andrew?
Well, I'm sure the military-industrial complex thinks it is. I'm sure Keynesians thinks it is. I'm sure, you know, Mitch McConnell, who recently said that the war in Ukraine is good for the U.S. defense business, I believe he also probably agrees with that. But this whole idea that war is good for the economy was debunked back in 1850 by French economist Frederick Bastiat. He wrote about the broken window fallacy, and that the idea of, you know, breaking shopkeepers' windows stimulates the economy because it ripples throughout the marketplace by having people spend more. It's asinine. It's completely ridiculous to think that benefits anybody at all. If you look at the broader financial markets, though, you know, you go back to the Yom Kippur War and you see how market reactions have been subdued over time. They've just become immune to conflicts in the Middle East. Energy markets, though, it's completely different, just based on the fact of how tight the global energy supply is right now. You know, Saudi Arabia is cutting production, OPEC's cutting production, Russia's cutting production. So any disruption, in the oil supply, any escalation of the conflict in Israel is going to inevitably lead to higher oil prices. What does that lead to? It leads to higher inflation. What does that lead to? The central bank having to raise interest rates. And what does that lead to? A greater cost of living. So this is creating a cascading effect for the global economy, particularly when it comes to inflation. Because not only do you have the war in Ukraine, now you have the war in Israel, and inevitably, perhaps you'll have the war between China and Taiwan, which will stretch the U.S. completely thin, more deficit finance spending, you know, more aid, just more disruption to global trade. So overall, you know, Tim, he says, you know, the prospect of World War III, if that's the case, global economy is doomed if it wasn't already.
Well, I think it's a dicey situation. Even the smallest misstep can send the world spinning in a new and potentially devastating direction with all facets. We'll keep you posted as information becomes available, and thanks, panel. that's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform: YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.